Good afternoon or good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's live stream. So welcome to those of you who are on YouTube or Facebook, and to those of you also in our streaming room as well. Hello. So today is all about shape-based tools, which is maybe a strange name, but I'll explain why in a second. So that's things like cropping, rotation, keystone, grids and guides, a few shortcuts and ways to improve your workflow. If you'd like to ask a question, then of course you're very welcome. So those of you on YouTube or Facebook, you just need to put a comment in and that will come straight through to me. For those of you in our live streaming room, if you hit the Q&A tab, you can pop a question in there, and then there's also my fantastic colleagues Victor and Helen also hanging out in there to answer your questions as well. If you would prefer to hide the chat, you can hit that button and then you'll get a bit more space on screen as well. So without further ado, let's move over to Capture One and talk about what we're going to talk about. So let me, as usual, start my mouse pointer, which I always forget. So the reason why this live stream was called shape-based tools was because the tool tab, where all the, let's just make this big icons for a second, where all the lens corrections, cropping, rotation, keystone, grids, etc. by default is called the shape tool tab because it does affect the shape of the picture. If you have a better suggestion, I'd love to hear it, but it was one of those tool categories which was really difficult to name and categorize because it's so diverse, but nothing to do with editing the picture or with cropping, rotation, changing the shape of it and so forth. So that's what we are going to look at today. And as I said, we'll look at some shortcuts and ways to speed up the efficiency of your workflow. So straight into it, we're going to start with cropping. So let's just open up this nice picture here from our ambassador, Paul Reefer, and we talk about cropping. Now, I'm sure you've all discovered how to crop. Nothing particularly earth-shattering about that. But there are a couple of things or hidden shortcuts and things which you might not know exist. So first of all, obviously I can crop by dragging any of the handles on the right-hand side. If you would decide you would like to reset the crop and you don't happen to be in the Shape Tool tab, the fastest way to do it is to right-click, and that will bring up a little mini floating tool, and then you can hit the reset button here, like so. Also, just as a side tip, this right-click with certain cursor tools actually works with other things as well. So for example, if we are using the pan tool and we right click, we get actually a little mini navigator up on screen. If you happen to be using the curves tool or the curves picker and I right click, then I actually get a little mini curve up on screen as well. So do have an experiment with right clicking. It's amazing what pops up when you right click with a cursor tool, right click a thumbnail, right click all kinds of things. Often these speedy shortcuts, subcontextual menus pop up. Anyway, back to cropping. So let's say we crop like so. So that's your first shortcut. Rotation. So typically if you've cropped and you want to tweak the rotation a bit, you can hover outside the boundary and then immediately the cursor tool turns to the rotate freehand tool. So then I can click drag and then rotate my picture. Now that's fine if, of course, you have access to the outside of the crop. But let's say you're happy with your full crop and I don't want to crop at all. I just want to rotate a bit. If you're on the Mac, if you hold down your Command key or Apple, then you shortcut straight to the freehand rotate. If you're on a PC, I believe that would be the Option key, but don't take my word for that. Give it a try. So try out the modifiers when you're in the crop tool, whether that's Alt, Option, Shift, Shift, Alt if you need a combo, and then you should see that switch over to the rotate, freehand rotate, and then I can spin like so if I wish to. So in terms of other shortcuts, we've got the ability to anchor the opposite corner to maintain either the aspect ratio or an orientation. So first of all, typically if I hold down my shift key, So let's go to this corner here. What's my aspect ratio? So I'm going to go to unconstrained. We'll talk about aspect ratios in a second. But if I go to the corner and shift, then it will lock the opposite anchor point, like so, and also maintain the aspect ratio. If I go to the middle handle and hold down shift, it's going to lock or anchor the other side, and then you'll see the aspect ratio is maintained, but it will maintain about this center, like so. Same goes if I go to the side here and hold down shift, it's going to anchor the opposite side of the crop. If I hold down my option key and do the same, say from the side here, or Alt as you might know it, it will anchor about the center. So if you want to keep the center of the crop locked in position, then Option drag will do so. So play around with those modifier keys. If you can't remember them, I know it's difficult, but just grab a handle, try a few different modifier keys and see what happens. All right, aspect ratio. You saw a brief glimpse of that. So obviously up here in the cursor tool, although I say obviously, you might not have spotted this little down arrow, but that gives you access to the aspect ratios. But again, for efficiency, whilst you're cropping, if you want to change your aspect ratio to prevent you from having to go up to the cursor tool, you can right click and that brings up pretty much the same menu, and then you can choose a different aspect ratio. So if I go 4:5, then I instantly snap to 4:5. Incidentally, you don't need aspect ratios for both landscape and portrait. One aspect ratio does the job for both. So if you wanted to have a vertical 4:5, all you need to do is force the crop. So all I'm doing really is dragging it aggressively to the right, and then that will switch to vertical orientation. If I want to go back to horizontal, I just drag aggressively downwards. Maybe you can see that on. So if I grab, you see the crop. So if I want to go vertical, I just grab aggressively to the right. Same action with a mouse, of course. If I wanted to go horizontal, aggressive downward movement, and then I'm back to my horizontal crop like so. So you just force it, squeeze it, if you like, and then it will snap to that horizontal or portrait-based orientation. So you've got your standard orientations there, or aspect ratios, sorry. Square, of course, will just give you a nice square crop. You can add your own aspect ratios if you need to do something specific, or remove your own aspect ratios. Now, there was a change in behavior in Marion, my colleague who was helping on the chat, reminded me this morning in 15.3.1, or around 15.3, I think it was, which was the ability, let's just go to a collection with a few more pictures in it, was the ability to either set the aspect ratio on a global basis or by a variant basis. So I have it set the old way because that's what I'm used to. But if we look at the cropping preferences, you'll see here aspect ratio behavior, use variant aspect ratio. So it means I like to have a different aspect ratio for each of my pictures, which for me is fine because I generally tend to go with unconstrained. I don't tend to crop to any predefined aspect ratios. That's just me. Some people like the consistency or the photographic look of certain other aspect ratios. So if I was to change this preference to global aspect ratio, like so, and then if I go to this picture, what have we got set here? So if I set this to original, so that would be the original aspect ratio of whatever camera this was captured on. And then I go back to this one, then you will also see my aspect ratio is original. So the choice is up to you. Do you want the same aspect ratio on every single picture, or do you want it to be unique for each photo? So lots of, it's pretty much a 50-50 split. So the reason why we made that change is for some workflows like wedding workflow, it makes total sense for them to have the same aspect ratio for each picture. For my workflow, it doesn't make sense at all. So I was actually quite annoyed by that change. So now you've got the choice to do either. Finally, just going to have a quick check for questions. Let's see. No, I think Helen and Victor have pretty much covered everything. VP just asked that. Yeah, so VP was asking, how can we create an edit shortcut that makes unconstrained the default opening parameter for the crop tool? Exactly that. So you just need to change that preference, and then it's on unconstrained. So yeah, that was a change in 15.3.1, so version 22. So if you're on an older version and you upgrade and you wonder why everything is on original, that's why, and you just need to tweak that preference a little bit. Okay, something which also comes up a lot is cropping to a particular output size. So how do you do that? Because if we look in the crop tool itself, you can see the ratio. Let's just go unconstrained. You can see a size like 1080 by 810 pixels here. But how do you go to an actual specific output size easily without trying to type in numbers, trying to get the crop exactly the right size, all of those kinds of things? That's really super frustrating if you don't know how to do it. So by far the easiest way, if you want to crop to a specific dimensions, is to set up an export recipe to do that. So if we go to our export recipes and I choose something like this one, this is just one of the default recipes. This is a recipe which is set up to specific dimensions. So 42 by 29.7 centimeters, which is an A3 print. So right now, if I start cropping this picture, so you see here, the numbers have gone red because they don't equal my output recipe. So these labels are always referring to the currently highlighted, not necessarily activated, the currently highlighted recipe. So you see, as I flick through these different recipes, these are pixel-based recipes, so the label says pixel. This one is arbitrary in terms of the scale is fixed, so the label will represent whatever a unit is set in the crop tool itself, which is inches. If I change this to centimeters, it's going to change up there. But something which has specific dimensions like this one, so this guy is now turned red because it doesn't match what we have in the dimensions. So you can go through a fruitless task of trying to open this up until it turns green on both, which is not very efficient, as you can see. Or what you can do is a very easy single click thing and say, go to output. And then that will immediately snap to the output of the currently highlighted export recipe. So now you can see it says 42 by 29.7. And then no matter how I mess around with this crop, you see it's locked to 42 by 29.7. And what Capture One will do is just calculate on this particular one the scale of export. So you see, if I make a really small export of this, Capture One needs to scale that up by 114%. If I make a super bigger crop, and this is a 100 or 150 megapixel file, I think, then it's going to need to be scaled down 43% to hit those parameters. So the benefit, if you need to export in a particular size, whether that's centimeters in this case or pixel dimensions, which you could do as well, you're in control of what the exact output is, as opposed to sending, you know, a full-size picture to Print Lab or a website and then them making decisions on how they want to crop it. So you want to be in control of that. Let's see, is there a way to crop tool to auto crop an image, a letterbox or pillar boxed image where you want to quickly crop to only the image area? Let's see. So you've used Capture One to old slide film. Unfortunately not. It is actually a feature in our cultural heritage version, which is a phase 1 product. It's not a Capture One product, which auto detects the film side of it, but that's only available with phase 1 cameras, I'm afraid. So unfortunately, David, no, it's down to the old manual side of it, unfortunately. Does it warn when we have to upscale? I think it turns red. So if I do that, oh, maybe not actually. I always used to thought the scale used to turn red, but maybe not. So my bad. No, it doesn't warn you, but you can see the scale. So you know anything above 100, then it's upscaling. And the numbers don't change color or anything like that. So no, it does not. But that's the way to see it. Just have a little look in that export summary. But that's really useful. I use that all the time. As I said, that's centimeters, but if we're doing, so let's make a new export recipe. Let's just take a very amateur use, but something which I do quite a lot and enjoy is sending postcards, and I use a service called TouchNote. And that needs very specific pixel dimensions. So if I put in here JPEG and my resolution or the scale is specific dimensions and it's in pixels, I know a TouchNote postcard has to be, I've no idea, can't remember, but let's say it's 2,500 by 1,400, like so. Then I just simply set this to output, and then as soon as I touch the crop, I've got my exact crop, which I know is going to fit in there perfectly. And that could be the same for a website where you know you have to fit into specific pixel dimensions, or your Facebook banner or your website banner or something like that. So really super useful. Okay, just checking for questions. I think we are all good actually for that. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, I think we're pretty good. Nice. All right. Thanks again to Helen and Victor for asking or answering, not asking, answering all those questions. All right, let's move on. So rotation, again, something which I'm sure you've pretty much discovered how to do, but there are a few shortcuts which you can do. Which recipe I'm on? Let's just go to unscaling one for simplicity. So rotation. So we looked at the ability to hover out the side or use your command key to get that up. You can, of course, use the slider as well, like so, which I find myself rarely doing because generally I don't need to make such mega amounts of rotation changes, and I tend to do it while I'm cropping anyway. What is useful in this particular tool is if you want to nudge the rotation a little bit. So if I give you a use example, so if we grab this, I thought I was looking for another picture. Keystone, no, this one will do. So this particular shot, we know, okay, the horizon is not especially straight. So one thing which I generally tend to use is this guy, which is the straighten cursor tool. So as the little pop-up help says, if I draw along the horizon or vertical, doesn't have to be horizon. So I know the horizon is something like that, and then it will rotate about that point. And sometimes if I find I've been a bit sloppy with drawing along the horizon and I want to tweak it a little bit, or if we do a auto rotation, which we'll look at in a second, it's much more helpful to just nudge the rotation a little bit by using the cursor tools. So for example, if I just use my up down cursor tools, so like so, you can see that's changing by 0.01 sorry, of a degree. So if I hold down shift and my cursor up and down, that would do 0.1 of a degree. So it's very easy to look at the picture and just nudge that rotation a little bit as well. So that's when I find the rotation and flip tool quite easy, quite useful. What it's also useful for is if I just hide for a minute, let's select all of these and reset them back to 0, is using auto rotate. So this tiny little magic wand here will do an auto rotation based on a little bit of AI as well. So mine a bit of artificial intelligence, looking at the picture to decide how it should be rotated. It doesn't require there to be a definitive vertical or horizontal. Quite funnily, it used to always get tricked if there was a very obvious horizon in the picture. It would then think, hang on a minute, that's not right, and completely over rotate it. So the AI has been improved a couple of times to be much more reliable. Does work on a batch. So let's just hide that for a second so we can see what's going on. Does work on a batch. So if I hit this auto rotate button here, then you'll see they're all rotate like so. All by different amounts and so on and so forth. And generally pretty good. So if we look at our landscape one here, I would probably tweak that a little bit more. So I'd just give that a nudge like so. It's kind of subjective because it's also got a bit of a keystone on it, but we could probably auto fix that as well, which we'll look at in a second as well. But I would say generally doing an auto rotate on everything, 80% hit rate, I reckon. So if we just look at these three pictures as an example, let's reset those and then we say rotate. So it's pretty quick, doesn't take any time. You see it's ignoring the color armor at the top anyway and using the person to straighten them up. So it is not reliant and doesn't generally get fooled by verticals and all that kind of stuff. So if we take our pup here and reset like so, then rotates about that point. So I'd say generally hit everything with an auto rotate and then tweak as necessary. Last example, it's definitely tilted left a little bit. So if we hit auto, brings that up quite nicely. Like any AI, like I've got my little oops category here. So if I decide to do an auto rotate on this, for whatever reason, it gets tricked. So the waterfall now looks wonky and of course the horizon is off. But as I said, if you've got 1,000 pictures which you want to tweak, it definitely saves you time just hitting auto on that and then tweak as you wish. In the auto adjust button at the top, there is a category you can tick on. So if you are using the auto button, so you can decide exactly what parameters you want to have, and one of those is rotation as well. I've got a feeling it's not on by default, but if you check it on, that will be part of the auto adjustment. And of course, when you import your pictures, you can also say auto adjust and it will use which categories are here as well. So you might find that helps to speed up your workflow too. Let's see that. Use straighten. I wondered if you can use multiple guidelines. Yes, you can. And we'll look at that at the end. That's the last thing we have to look at later is grids and guidelines. So what have I missed on rotation? Yes, a strange little option, which I only figured out how to use yesterday, is something called rotate snap. So if I use this one, let's say we shot this picture. Let's just reset our crop. Let's say we shot this picture and it's overhead, but the orientation is wrong. So what I would do is I would go to rotation and flip and I would use my left or right button, or I would use my rotate left or right, or the shortcut here. And I deleted that one by mistake earlier, but easy to reinstate. So the orientation is wrong. So it should be, actually, what should it be? It should be like this. But when it was shot, it ended up like that. So this is how the rotation should be. And let's say I want to crop like so, and actually give it a little bit of a rotational tweak too. So now I'm happy with how that orientation looks. Now in here, there's this odd little feature called rotate snap. So if I do reset here, what's going to happen? So it's going to reset all my rotation. So it's going to go back to looking like this. If we zoom out, oops, and we reset the crop, it's going to go back to that orientation. So that's a bit annoying. So I've got to do that once more. What was my crop? It was like this. And then I did a bit of a rotation as well. So that's my preferred one. But if I say rotate snap, it will snap back to my previous orientation. So it will reset my 3.93 degrees here, but it won't reset the full 90-degree twist. So if I say rotate snap, it'll do that. And then I can adjust again, rotate snap, like say, rotate snap. If I reset here, then we're going back to that full orientation as well. So that's a little weird feature which probably no one's actually looked at since about 2001. Will you ever use it? don't know. But if you come across it in the menu and wonder what the hell it is and press it like I did yesterday and saw that nothing was happening, now we know. So it's a very strange corner case, but maybe you'll have a use for it one day. Okay, let's see. I think we're good for questions. Let's see. Jonathan, I saw the question, just reading your question. Is there any way to get Capture One to prefer big round numbers? I spend a huge amount of time moving, for instance, between 1001 and 999 to finally get 1000 pixels in one dimension. Or to get 10 or 0.5 or whatever. It wears me out. What you need to do, Jonathan, is crop to output, like we said. So if you need a specific number, like 1000, don't spend ages trying to set that crop. Use that set to output trick, and it will take you a millisecond to do it. Yeah, so don't wear yourself out by doing that. Is there a flip both horizontal and vertical? David says. Yeah, there isn't, but if you say horizontal and then vertical, that should do both. So they're both flipped. I think, oh, actually, maybe not horizontal. I can't tell with this one. So if we say flip horizontal, the thingy, whatever that is going to be on the right. And if I now say flip vertical, it should be down the... no, I see what you mean. So, yeah, I see what you mean, David. So no, there isn't a flip both, as far as I can tell, if my brain is working correctly. But that actually could be a useful thing to have. So, yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. David's just written that could have been a useful thing for a few slides shot on the wrong side. Yeah, but no, it doesn't. So unfortunately, that's something you would have to do in post-production. But it's a good thing. It's a good thing to have as a feature request for us. Okay, so just checking my notes. We did that. We looked at our angle slider. Yes, we did. We nudged with our cursor keys. We've got our shortcuts for left and right. Shortcuts, by the way, are under Edit, Keyboard Shortcuts. So if I type in rotate, then we've got rotate, left, right, and snap. So if I wanted to reinstate that, I can just type in what I need and say close. Oh, I overwrote it because I used that shortcut to add a new field adjustment layer in my default set. So that's why that one disappeared. And we've looked at the auto rotation function too. Good. Next thing, keystoning. By the way, I don't know if I said this at the start. I didn't think it would take us an hour to talk about these things, and it won't. So probably 10-15 minutes, and then we let you go on your way. So keystoning, what's that? So you know the principle of, I assume, falling down building syndrome, or pretty much anything else you shoot that the perspective isn't correct. So in an earlier version of Capture One, it escapes me which release, we added an auto button for keystoning, and we also added, you might not have noticed, a new adjustment called skew. Because even with the best will in the world with the previous Keystone tool, sometimes you couldn't get to a point where it was fully corrected. So now it's working way better than it was, and there's an auto feature. So auto is simple. By default, it's on vertical only. So if I hit auto, that will simply straighten up. If you want to know what Capture One picked, again, this is a basic AI feature. If you want to know what Capture One picked as its reference point, you can always turn on the cursor and then you can see, okay, Capture One found this line and decided those were the best to use. Equally, if we go to something like, well, let's just try another simple one. Cursor tool doesn't need to be on, but as I said, if it's on, you can see what Capture One found, and of course, we have a crash, which is always a nice way to start in a live stream, which is frustrating because that was working. I did exactly the same pictures this morning, and there we go. So let's go back to Keystone and see if we can make it do that again. Where are we? So let's say auto. No, fine this time. How bizarre. Yeah, and now you can see that reference point which Capture One picked up. I would obviously, this is quite a heavy correction, but you can see the extent that you can go to if necessary, and how much that we've chopped out. By the way, if you want to, let's say you wanted to have a little bit more width than this, but you're prevented by obviously the correction of the picture. In the crop tool, there is a crop outside image button, which will allow me to extend beyond the image boundary. So if you want to fill that in using whatever your preferred technology method is, sometimes it's only a little tiny piece, then you can just move that outside of the crop boundary like so. So that's very useful. And then of course we can do the, let's reset this one. So again, this Capture One doesn't need you to have, like the auto rotation, a perfect horizontal, a perfect vertical. As long as there's enough data there for the AI to figure something out, then it works pretty good. So I shot this thinking, as usual, I was perfectly lined up. So now I can hit four-way button, hit auto, and then straight away that will do a pretty nice adjustment of that. Same for this one. Let's reset. Choose this as auto, hit auto, and you can see what Capture One picked up. So I have to say, again, like auto rotation, it's pretty reliable. 8 out of 10 times, I'd say it gives you a decent result without really the need to do any adjustment or tweaking. Now, sometimes, like any AI tech, it's not going to work. So if I go to, this picture. So again, this is a picture I took relatively recently where I was 100% convinced. I'd lined up the camera to what my expectation would be, which would be that. But seems I wasn't that smart. And if I hit on auto, see, nothing happens. So I would think that AI would be able to pick that up quite easily, but like any AI, it's not infallible. So it cannot use the maths to find the right spot. So what we need to do is just tell Capture One manually what we want to do. So if we grab our 4 control points like so, and just drop them on the object which we feel should be square, like so, and then hit the apply button in the middle, then away we go. So now, if I get the right pan tool, so now it's squared that up quite nicely. If you need to tweak at all, you can always go to the sliders and then pull that around a little bit more. What the skew does is like a parallelogram. So if we grab the skew slider, then you'll see what that does. It will stretch corner to corner or corner to corner like so. Double tap, take it back to 0. So yeah, sometimes you might find yourself in a situation where you need to do it manually, but 80% of the time, the auto keystone is working really nicely and saves you a huge bunch of time as well. What did I miss on keystoning? I think that was it. Oh, this button down here, apply camera keystone data. This is only valid for digital cameras or digital backs from phase 1 because there is a, I guess, accelerometer in it which actually measures the angle of the camera and puts that in the data so we know the camera was tilted 10 degrees up or whatever. Then we can use that data to do an automatic correction as well. But for anyone else, I'd say go for the auto. Okay, Carsten says, sorry, that was too fast. How to get a wider picture when using Keystone? So in the crop tool itself, crop outside image. So if we get the crop tool up, you can see it's quite a relatively big adjustment that I've had to make. And if I wanted to have a bit more of that floor without this turned on, I would be prevented. I can't go into the void. But if I turn on crop outside image like so, let's say I only just wanted a little bit like that, it would be dead easy for me to recreate those cobblestones in the front there. So now it's cropped with this void, but that would be super simple to fill in. And sometimes it's like only a little bit of blue sky or whatever. Like if we go auto on this one, and I wanted to have you know, an expanse of blue sky or whatever, and I'm prevented, then I can say crop outside and I can sneak into it like so. This is just an iPhone shot, you can see, so it doesn't need to be raw file or anything like that. This is even just a hike file, so hike or JPEG also works just as well. Okay, hope that answers your question, Carsten. Yes, it does. That's good. But there isn't, John was saying, there is not a auto function to fill that area. So not as yet. Anyway, maybe that will come one day. But no, if you wanted to fill that little missing chunk in, like in my example, wherever it was, in my example here, that would be a job for an external editor, Photoshop, Affinity, or whatever. All right, final thing. Grids and guides. So if we go to, let's just go back to this picture for a second. We can get our correct orientation once more. Let's throw in a crop. So when I crop, you'll see these this grid pop up, and that's controlled by the grids tool. We have different grid types. So this is the standard lines. So we could add additional lines if we wanted to, and then I would have more pop up. We can control the color of the line, so we can switch it here as an example, but we can also change the type. So golden ratio, not one I use personally, and then the Fibonacci spiral, which has a few additional things like which orientation it's in and so forth. So you can manage all those different types of grids in there, the color as you saw, and follow crop, which is pretty important. So you might find, you'd probably be unlucky to find this, but if you're on a certain old version of Capture One and you upgraded to another certain old version, you might find that follow crop is not turned on by default, and then you'll be in this weird situation where the grid is in the background and doesn't follow the crop. There are some use cases for that, but generally we want the crop, or sorry, the guides to follow the crop like so. There's also guides. So let's go ahead and go here and say guides. And these will turn on the guides, which you can place over the picture. Now this is probably the only time when I'll ever use this cursor tool, this little arrow up here. Generally I'm on the pan tool or whatever I happen to be doing, cropping, using a brush or whatever. But if you want to move a guide, select this one, and then you can hover over it and then pop the guide where you want. So let's say I wanted to take this shot and then carefully remove my macaroons and replace them in exactly the same position, then I could do so with a bunch of guides. To add more guides, we go in the View menu and Customize Guides, add horizontal, add vertical, guides color. You can set up a shortcut as well. If this is something you're doing frequently, it would be much faster to have a shortcut than browse into this menu. And then I could add my various different guides that I wanted to. So let's go back into guides and say add a vertical. Pop that there and so on. If you shoot tethered, you can use these in the live view window too. So if you're working with live view and you turn on the guides, then they'll also pop up there as well. Not much to say really else about guides. The only thing, if again you're going to use them frequently, is you might want to customize your toolbar. So if we say customize and we find the guides button down here, we can drop that on the toolbar, and our grids button, we could drop that up as well. And turn the guides on and off with a button click, and then also the grid like so. So very useful for still lifes, continuity between those shots, architecture, that kind of stuff. Ali, how can we find export file from a shortcut key? Well, any shortcut key, if we say edit keyboard shortcuts, if you just type in the functionality, export, then you'll see the various different options. That's by far the best way to find a function and assign a shortcut key to it. Maciek, I'm so glad you asked this question because this came up earlier. To have multiple crops for one image to automate export for print in Instagram and one step. Yes. So you can't necessarily do it in one steps, but you could do it in 2 steps. So let's take, I just need to find a collection which doesn't have a bunch of variants in it because this will mess up. See, these have all various different, well, actually, let's take this top 3 pictures like so. Let's make a new collection. So we'll make a new album and we just call this multi crop. And let's put these 3 pictures. Yeah, let's put those 3 in there and this one as well. So we've got 4 pictures like so. And let's say, as your example, Maciek, we wanted to have an Instagram one and a full size, or we wanted to have a full size one and a specific crop for our webpage. Let's say that. So first of all, let's go ahead and think about full size. So this is not cropping to any specific, let's go to unconstrained dimensions. We're going to crop these as we wish, like so, and whatever. We're going to crop this one like this. So now we've got our 4 crops which are not constrained by any constraints like a web page, social media, or something like that. So we're happy with those. So what I would do personally is, rather than going through and upsetting all these other crops, is to select them all and say clone variant. So that will make a virtual copy like so of all the pictures and copy all those adjustments as well. So now you see where this is 1 and 2. So first of all, I want to reset the crop on all of those. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to say select by the same variant. Okay, so that will pick up all the variant 2s. Let's go to our crop tool and just reset everything. So now we're at the maximum, but they're still straight and rotated. And now I'm going to think, all right, I want to do my specific one for, what did we say? Let's go for my postcard export. Let's do that. This could be social media size or whatever. So now I can go through, make sure I have it set to output. Now they've all snapped to my postcard output, and if I need to, I can just have a quick little adjustment of what I need for those. So now I've got variant 1 as my full size, variant 2 as my cropped, like so. So what I would do then is go back to variant 1 and I would say select by same, variant 1. You could also put them in a smart album or a different collection, or you could color tag variant 1's red and variant 2's purple. Loads of different ways you could do it. And then I know these ones are my full size, so I would select my whatever, my full size JPEG, export those. Then I would switch to my variant 2's, select by same, variant position 2, make sure I've got my postcard 1 selected and export those. And if I was smart, in my export location for my subfolder, I would use this tag called recipe name, which would put them in a folder called postcard export, or put them in a folder called JPEG full size or whatever. So I hope that sort of answers your question, Maciek. It's not like a one-click option, but I would personally never adjust the crop, say export the picture, and then adjust that same variant with a different crop for another one. Because let's say your client comes back and says, actually, can you re-export those full size ones, but this one's a bit too dark? Then you'd have to re-crop it again and then make an adjustment. So I would always personally keep different aspect ratios or crops of the same picture on a different variant. So that's just my advice. But you could do it the long way around, but I think that's really the fastest way to do it. Especially as the process recipes, or export recipes, sorry, are designed for those different aspect ratios. Cool. Thank you for asking that. Philip says, can you place a guide numerically in the middle? The cursor doesn't snap to it. I don't think so, Philip. So if I grab a new guide, they do give you a readout, I thought, but I could be wrong. Yeah, so you can see the pixel readout here, but it doesn't snap to a particular location. So no, it's not possible. What you could do, I guess, if you turn on a, let's turn on a grid, and you wanted to see the center, I would just put this as 1 and 1, like so. Whoops. Or 2 and 2. Should be, there we go. So if I see 2 and 2, but that will be the center of the uncropped image. So that's not, oh no, that's the center of the crop, my bad. Yeah, because we've got follow crop on. So I would do 2 and 2 on your grid like so. And then that way you can always target the exact center of the crop. But that's a grid, not a guide. So just be aware of that, okay? David says, where do you set the crop grid? So down here in the grid tool. But I'm also glad you asked that, because there are some different options as well. So if we go to the preferences and look at crop, there's a bunch of different ways you can set up this behavior. So the mask is this slightly opaque setting behind it. Let's just get unconstrained back. So this one, the mask, is this slightly opaque setting in the background. So if you prefer to completely black it out or not at all, you can adjust that. Same goes for brightness. So you can play around with those and find a combination that looks good. Show frame, I actually like this little frame on the crop. So that shows you, if I just reset those to default, that shows you a little frame around the edge, just a couple of pixels, which I think I might keep on. Labels, that's the labels with the dimensions, so you can always turn them off so they only pop up when you're dragging if you find them distracting, or you can never show them, or you can always have them on. And the handles, these are at the corners, so you can also always have them on, never, or only when dragging. So even without them on, you can still pretty much easily pick up the crop. So if you find them a bit ugly, you could turn them off. Aspect ratio we spoke about, and you can always get back to the defaults by doing that. So have a little play around in those. Same goes for, no, actually there's nothing else really related to this one. So have a look in the crop preferences, and then you can play around with all that stuff. Nice one. So I think pretty much that brings us up to what I'd planned to speak about today. I've just put up on screen a couple of QR codes. So if you wave your camera at those, you should be able to then link straight to a web page, which will take you to the sign-ups for forthcoming live sessions. So nothing next week, but May 18th, I have a guest, April Alexander, who's super awesome. And that's going to be an interesting one, because we're going to look at taking the same image and then going in 2 different directions for color grading. So that's always interesting, because there is not just one option for a color grade, there's always 2. And then May 24th, what's new in Capture One? So I can't reveal too much, but you can look at the text there and in the description. But by May 24th, there will be an update to the current version of Capture One, and we'll just run through all the stuff which has been added to that, which is quite a nice update. Final questions. I think we are almost pretty much covered. Again, thanks to Helen and Victor. Yeah, I think we've pretty much answered everything between us, which is great. If you missed a question or you missed an answer, when these are uploaded on our support site, support.captureone.com, we always put in a little link to the Q&A as well. And you can always read the questions and answers that came up if you had a burning question as well. All right, so thanks for joining me today. I'll leave these up for a little bit longer. Also, you can click the sticky if you're in our webinar room, and then click that, and that will take you to the sign up as well. But support.captureone.com as well will take you straight to those pages. Thanks again, everybody, and hope to see you soon. And enjoy the rest of your day and the weekend when it gets here. Bye-bye now.